Good morning. My name is Samuel Hollister. I am a doctoral candidate at Yale University in orchestral conducting. I did master's degrees in orchestral conducting and music theory pedagogy at Peabody, and before that I was at Yale again for undergraduate. And I'm very sorry that I can't be there in person today. I have rehearsals here at Yale. This is pre-recorded. But I am thrilled beyond description to be able to speak with you about one of my favorite pieces of music, one of my favorite composers, and one of my favorite topics. My paper is entitled Asymmetry from Symmetry, Uncanny Modulation via Imbalanced Dualized Voice Leading Transformations in the second movement of the first string quintet. A little wordy, but hopefully you enjoy. Thank you very much for being here. So one of the most contested elements of Johannes Brahms' compositional style is undoubtedly his relationship to dualism, the establishment of parity between seemingly opposite musical functions, and the surprising euphony that arises from their unlikely juxtaposition. As Margaret Notley points out, many have challenged the notion of dualism over the last century and a half, especially in the context of Brahms, arguing that the term has gathered too much specificity to truly offer any analytical utility or to be grounded in salience. Nevertheless, Brahms's interest in dualism is integral to his compositional voice, and as a case study, we will look at the conclusion of the second movement of Brahms's String Quintet number 1, opus 88, which is reprinted here. Ultimately, this passage serves as an incredible demonstration of the very salient repercussions of the juxtaposition of harmonic functions in seeming opposition to one another. I divide this passage into 3 sections: measures 196 to 199, which are in red, measures 200 to 203, which are in purple, and measures 204 through 208, which are in green. Let's take a listen. As we can see, Brahms takes the tonic of C-sharp major and almost magically transforms it into the ultimate tonic of A major. How on earth does that happen? First, consider the section in red. Brahms unequivocally establishes C-sharp major as tonic. The extended cadential progression, viewed on the tone nets, displays standard characteristics of tonal bookending, following a 1 to flat 6 to Neapolitan to 5 back to 1 cadential pattern, which is looped twice. Brahms ventures to the far reaches of the C-sharp major diatonic world, namely the root position Neapolitan, labeled as chord 3, then snaps back to the dominant in chord 4, finally repeating the progression to further orbit and thus establish the tonic as C-sharp major. Note that the second chord, A major, is what Brahms will somehow ultimately crown as the movement's final tonic, a fact that is unthinkable by the end of this first C-sharp major section. Section 2, in purple, narrows down this cadential loop by removing the final 2 chords, the progression becomes merely 1 flat 6, 1 flat 6. By removing the Neapolitan and 5 chords, the music is left without true cadential power, but our ears nevertheless latch onto the C-sharp major harmony much in the same way as we relish the tonic in a cadential pattern. This feeling is in no small part a result of the immediately preceding strong cadences in C-sharp major in section 1. That cadential stretch taught us to hear C-sharp major as 1 and A major as flat 6, a colorful yet not uncommon chordal function. Not to mention, the hypermetric arrival points are measures 200 and 202, the C-sharp major measures. For us to abandon ship and, in spite of all of this evidence, suddenly hear A major as 1 and C-sharp major as a quite shocking 3-chord, major 3, would be pretty baseless. That being said, with these 2 chords our only remaining harmonic objects, and with the function-based power of the cadence removed, we begin to latch onto their Riemannian relationship instead. PL, the parsimonious voice leading maneuver composing the parallel P operation with the leading tone exchange L operation. Our ears now fixate on the 2 displaced pitches. The harmonic transformation between these harmonies, PL, is coupled with its inverse, LP, to allow for the 2 chords to oscillate, perhaps indefinitely, although only twice in our actual experience. We can thus think of these 2 separate transformations, PL and LP, as different sides of the same coin, and I will refer to them together as simply PL from now on for that reason. But Brahms' notion of duality goes beyond the simple invertible function, 2 sides. Instead, Brahms frames this bidirectional relationship itself as a single member of a larger duality. In the final section, the plagal cadence, measures 204 to 208, we see the other member of this duality, the Nebenverwandt or N relationship, which, like PL and LP, is a 2-voice, half-step displacing operation. We can allow the Nebenverwandt or N and PL operations to exist in an equivalence class within the set of voice leading operations. We need only establish the equivalence relation as follows. 2 operations are considered equivalent or related if they share the same number of units of voice leading work. This puts the 2 operations L and P in class 1, 1 half step of voice leading work, and the operations R for relative, PL, LP, N for Nebenverwandt, and S for slide, for instance, C major to C sharp minor or E flat minor to D major. Those all can be entered into class 2 units of voice leading work. By restricting our study to operations that displace any given voice by at most 1 half step, we eliminate R, whose displacement spans a whole step, a different and arguably unrelated effect. This yields a complete class 2, PL, LP, N, and S. Based on this last point, we might start to wonder what a network of class 2 triad transformations might look like. After all, the tone net serves best to show us relationships between triads with 2 common tones and only 1 unit of voice leading work between them, or at least where only 1 voice moves. For instance, consider the 3 neighbors of A major. There's F sharp minor on the left through the relative relationship, C sharp minor on the right through the leading tone exchange relationship, and A minor above through the parallel relationship, all of which involve displacing only a single voice. Granted, again, R, which displaces 1 voice by a whole step, carries voice leading work of 2, but still only moves 1 voice and keeps the other 2 constant. So using the tone nets to map out triadic space for a piece that relies heavily on class 2 transformations, while possible, is perhaps strange. So what else can we do? Consider the 4 class 2 transformations once again. Amazingly, these 4 operations are precisely the 4 relationships, no more, no less, no different, that Brahms uses in the final 3 harmonies of the movement. In fact, in those 2 final phrases, from measure 200 through measure 208, there are only 3 unique harmonies, and we can plot them in a simple graph, labeling their edges with the class 2 transformations that relate them. I will refer to this construction as a class 2 loop. For context, Jack Dowdett and Peter Steinbach's cube dance depicts the 24 major and minor triads, the 4 augmented triads, and edges representing every pairing of those triads separated by 1/2 step of voice leading work. Brahms's 3 triads are circled in red here, each one connected to each other by 2 edges. I will leave my thoughts on the relationship between these 2 constructions, cube dance and my class 2 loop, as pure theoretical objects for another time, but for now we will focus on practicality. The class 2 loop, triangular space, adapts a contracted subgraph of cube dance to a more direct and palatable scope for our purposes, so that's what we will focus on. Up to now in my discussion of this excerpt, I have yet to mention the S relationship in this passage, the slide relationship. And that's because it relates 2 harmonies, C sharp major and D minor, that never appear next to each other in the actual passage. But considering the trajectory of the excerpt on the tone nets, we see that these are the 2 harmonies that bookend the final A major tonic, providing a symmetrical harmonic space for the tonality to blossom. How strange then that this bookending, the use of C sharp major from way on the sharp side and D minor from way on the flat side of the ultimate A major tonic, is actually easily traversed by S, slide, a class 2 operation no more distant in principle than the 2 operations, PL and N, that apparently compound to create it. Evidently, 1 + 1 = 1. This is where the class 2 loop explains things very well. PL and N are not exactly dual operations by nature. They are members of a triple network of evenly distributed operations, whose final member, S, only carries with it the illusion of further distance when the class 2 loop is juxtaposed with Brahms' shifting tonal network. Nevertheless, Brahms employs PL and N in a dual relationship in that tonal context. He establishes a domain from C sharp major on one side of A major to D minor on the other side that we perceive as ultimately creating context for and justifying that central A major as the final tonic. So, there are 3 players, PL, N, and S, that connect our bizarre 3 final harmonies, but the real work in tonicizing A major is performed by only the first 2 of these 3 transformations. To our ears, the third, slide, is felt only in its retrospective ability to relate the 2 extremes that the first 2, PL and N, respectively span. Thus, Brahms explores a perfectly symmetrical class 2 transformational space, the triangular class 2 loop, but treats 2 of its members as more tonalizing than the uncanny third. Thus, asymmetry achieved from perfect symmetry. This perspective is quite remarkable on its own, but it does not yet quite explain the most shocking element of the passage, the shift of tonality, incontrovertibly palpable yet seemingly without any motivation, from C sharp major to A major. How can the former tonality of C sharp major turn from stable tonic into a bizarre sharp side far out point simply with the introduction of a third triad, D minor? The answer lies in the interaction between the notion of a class 2 loop and the space of tonality. Others, many others, such as Cohn, Rings, Heyer, Brouwer, and Lewin have proposed geometric models that would allow functional relationships and voice-leading perturbations to coexist. These models assume that harmonic transformations are easily labeled as functional, meaning guided by modal gravitation, or Riemannian, meaning justified only through parsimonious voice leading. More often than not, this assumption is perfectly reasonable, and the models are quite useful. However, in this case, I aim to investigate the both scenario. In the spirit of Schrödinger, C-sharp major becoming A major need not be heard as only functional or only Riemannian. It can inhabit both roles at the same time. Certainly, throughout this passage, Brahms increasingly employs voice-leading relationships, thereby invoking more and more Riemannian strategies as the functional relationships become more and more tenuous. But critically, the functional connections never disappear entirely. We can still make sense of each successive pair of chords in terms of some local tonic, initially C-sharp major and finally A major. So how does the increasing involvement of Riemannian relationships relate to the tonal ones? In short, the emergent dialogue between Riemannian and functional syntaxes is a dissonant one, and our ear's attempt to resolve it is what directly leads to the sense of tonal shift. With our new framework in mind, let us pass through the excerpt once more chronologically in order to illustrate and understand this last point. We can now see why it might be useful to rate each of the three constituent phrases in terms of its reliance on functional versus Riemannian syntaxes. The first phrase in red is undoubtedly tonal in the key of C-sharp major, and it bears only a little in the way of Riemannian relationships. 1 to flat 6, sure, although this is plenty justifiable through the subsequent cadential trajectory in tonal terms as well. By the second phrase in purple, we are left with just the two-faced 1 to flat 6 progression in alternation, forcing us to relinquish our reliance on the previous cadence pattern that justified its tonal function. Meanwhile, in that vacuum, our ears further latch onto the voice-leading property that relates the two harmonies. Thus, tonal function begins to fade, existing primarily as a memory, while a Riemannian hearing steals the spotlight and attempts to give these triads equal weight. By the third phrase, in green, the Riemannian relationship has come to full fruition, allowing the move A major to D minor, despite the fact that D minor is relatable to the original tonic of C-sharp major by only the remotest of tonal explanations, being the minor Neapolitans, quite tenuous. Immediately, we try our hardest to rationalize this harmony, this D minor harmony, in a tonal context, and the subsequent return to the A major chord offers us that very explanation. 4, minor 4 to 1 in A major. Apologies for the motorcycle. So the third phrase might be marked by a tonality-defiant Riemannian character, but it simultaneously knits a novel tonal fabric to replace the previously discarded C-sharp minor tonic. Now we can view the two syntaxes in light of the characteristics they possess. Brahms uses tonality as a strong gravitational force, whereas he calls on voice-leading transformations to neutralize those tonal tendencies. Contrary to intuition, this culture of the syntaxes is not by nature. Indeed, tonality can serve as a means for the most outlandish of surprising modulations, a la Reger's modulation, while even bizarre Riemannian transformations can serve to prop up a gravitational tonality rather than deactivate it. Consider the dominant functional properties of hexpole relationships, for instance. Regardless, this hierarchy is nothing special. What's mind-boggling about the passage is not the conflicting nature of tonality and Riemannian transformations that ultimately enables the unexpected modulation. It's the manner in which Brahms controls the faders, shifting from one syntax to another and then ultimately using both. It's the fact that through this tactic, Brahms satisfies our subconscious need for immediate justification and yet leads us somewhere we cannot justify, like a pickpocket who convinces us that our wallets ought to be stolen. He leaves us with the feeling that we ended up where we shouldn't have, or maybe where we truly were all along, or maybe nowhere at all. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I hope that it was at least a little bit interesting, and I again am very sad that I couldn't make it in person, but I look forward to connecting with those of you who might be interested in reaching out with questions, comments, or thoughts. And I wish you all a delightful remainder of your time together and happy conferencing. Take care.